Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Extreme Radio, built by MDI Construction Inc. I want to apologize for the late start, just getting some things configured on our end, but we're ready to go on this week 2 of the NFL season, even though we're talking about 8-man football. It's a good victory for the Titans and a lot of games still going on. Thanks for spending your Sunday with us instead of spending it with the NFL season. Or if you're doing both at the same time, that's great. And, of course, Extreme Radio, always built by MDI Construction Inc. Just go to mdiconst.com and search them up on Facebook so you can see their latest projects. Spencer Thompson and Trent Legate here. James Shannon will be here in a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and recap some of the games that we've seen and also some of the scores here. First game we're going to go with is Franklin Christian Academy had their first season home opener. To my knowledge, I may be getting that fact wrong there. Let me just check the helmet schedule here. Okay, it was their home opener against Lighthouse Christian School. They were victorious 62-26. Now, James was at that game. He is not in studio right now, but James was at that game, and he mentioned to us specifically that Lighthouse just had some mistakes. They missed some drop passes and such, and he still believes they are a solid football team. But Trent, really good morale for the Franklin Christian Academy after losing to the Freedom Cowboys and losing to CCS. They got that victory against Riverside. They got that victory back in Fayetteville last week. So really good morale for FCA to go 2-2 on the season and stay 1-0 in the South.
Yeah, and we can't forget that FCA is still 2-2, so they still have a chance to go run and make the playoffs. And getting a good big win against Lighthouse, it was their first game, so everyone was really curious of how they were going to do, with only having, I believe, 12 men on the roster. And Lighthouse didn't just be a nobody. They were still somebody in this game. Like James told us, it wasn't the points wasn't how the game was actually reflected. But I don't know if that's true or not. I wasn't at the game. But FCA, they're playing. Who are they playing this week?
We've got them on the schedule here. They are playing at St. Andrews Swanee, so that's their second game in the MTAC South Division, or second game facing someone in the MTAC South Division so far.
Yeah, so FCA, they facing Swanee next week. Number one, are they in the same conference?
They're both in MTAC, yes, and they're both in the same division, MTAC South.
I'm in division. Yeah, but they being in the same division, they need to come away with that win next week. But this week was a good win against Lighthouse, making them go to 2-2.
And, of course, I did have the chance to talk to Coach Shaka Hill after the game because we were just across the street at the Franklin Classical Swanee game, which we'll get to that later. But I had a chance to talk with the defensive coordinator, Shaka Hill, and he mentioned that some of the players, I believe specifically on FCA's side, started cramping up and just not pushing through. I jokingly told him, of course, you need to put some bananas in those boys, give them some potassium, but it's good to see that at least Shaka is confident in going down to Swanee and facing the Mountain Lions up on the mountain. So we'll see how that game is next week. South Haven Christian School remains undefeated as the Patriots beat the Crusaders of Hendersonville Christian Academy 40-14. And James would have a little bit more to talk about this, but again, he's not in studio right now. But he did mention that that Hendersonville was down to about, I think, 11 men in their game, or 12 men in that game. They had some injuries and they had some issues throughout the game, but they still pushed through till the very end. So a commendable effort by Hendersonville, but South Haven remains undefeated, and we're seeing this matchup here, and we're going to get to the score of another team in the north in just a moment. But, I mean, we're seeing that South Haven completely surpassing expectations in the preseason, and they are completely undefeated, even with having some of their main quarterbacks down and such. It's hard to picture South Haven in this position. Like preseason, it was hard to predict them being in this position, but now they're undefeated in the north, and they're one of the top contenders for the MTAC semis.
Yeah, well, that's James' preseason predictions. You can't forget, which I want to bring up. Me and James both picked. I think James picked FCA, and I picked FCA, so our prediction was right for that week. I mean, for that game. But Hendersonville, I mean, if I think Bader would have had a little has his wrist. I know last week we said his wrist was hurt. I don't know if it still is this week. That could have an issue to do with it. But I'm kind of curious. Do we know if who South Haven's quarterback was for that game?
It wasn't Andrew Crawley because he unfortunately had a season-ending injury. I didn't catch who his quarterback or who was the quarterback for the Patriots in that game. I believe it may have been one of their third strings. Again, this is why we need James in studio right now. But of course he'll be here shortly. But I did not catch who was the starting quarterback for the Patriots. I'm sure we'll get a lot of YouTube comments of people complaining like, "Oh, who's this person? How come you don't have your stats right?" and all of that. But I believe they were down to a third string in that game.
Yeah, because I call him Rojo. This is what I've always called him, but I don't know his. Yeah, this is what I call him. He's out right now. We saw a picture on Instagram, and then Crawley he's out sadly. So if I remember, I think it's Xavier will be playing quarterback a little bit, but I'm not 100% on that. But yeah, they're number one, so South Haven should be happy that they're telling James that he's wrong, and they should be really happy where they are right now. Like they were winless last season, were they, or did they have one win?
They were winless last season. They went 0-8, and their last victory was the semi before they lost the national championship game for their team. They went 0-8, and then they had their first victory when they were hosting Bowling Green Christian Academy this season. So, when they were hosting Madisonville this season, they broke the winless streak that they had in 2016. So now they're keeping a lossless streak, if that can be the word applied there.
Yeah, so after going from 0-8 to bouncing back 4-0, if I'm South Haven, I'm really happy where I'm at right now.
Excuse me, my mic was unmuted there. So it actually, I believe, yes, they are 4-0 because they were originally going to face the Heat at their home stadium, but due to the storms of Hurricane Irma, they had to cancel that game, and they're going to be playing that in the final week of the season on October 20th. So that's a interdivision game, and we're looking forward to see that game in the last week. But right now, the Patriots are 4-0, and they have a bye week now going into their next game.
And I just want to say again, before I forget, I picked South Haven to win that game. I don't know if James picked him or changed what his original picks were, but I'm pretty sure he picked Hendersonville. So just want to let y'all know I'm 2-0 and James is 1-1.
It's a good thing if anybody's you're the one who's keeping track of those statistics, which is good. So we'll be able to get at the end of the season who was more right and who was more wrong on that. So that'll be good. Before we get into another big win in the North, the Webb School defeated Madisonville 56-0. And Trent, we've seen some of the games for the Madisonville Defenders, and it's unfortunate to see that they are still on a winless streak from 2016, their inaugural year. They've gone 0-8. And now with their loss record, let me count the losses here. Let's see, that's 3, 4. They are now 0-12 as of now, which you do want to see a win for them, but I mean you can't discredit the Webb School because they had their game against Hendersonville. They beat Hendersonville, I believe, by a margin of about 20 or 30 points. I'd have to pull up that score again. And then they had a bye week and going down to New Life in Alabama and just losing that game 64-29, and then they come back and beat Madisonville. They're right now 2-1 on the season. No in-division games yet, and they'll have their in-division game on Friday night, and we'll get into the preview for those games after our interview with Scott Dorset. But with the Webb School and Madisonville, it's just a dominated game by the Webb School and such, but Madisonville just having an unfortunate winless streak going into their second season of their team's existence.
Yeah, if I'm Madisonville, I want to make everyone stop saying that. Next week, another playing the Heat on Heat's homecoming. they need to come in there and they need to open up the door and win that game for Madisonville. So just give them a gimme up, because right now they're down. They're down, kind of in the thoughts. Oh, we're just used to losing. They want to start a franchise that's used to winning, and they need to start that next week. That's what they really need to do to get them going, to get their mindset differently. Then they need to – but against Webb, I haven't seen Webb yet this season, but I know they still got Jake that was in the All-Star game last year. I'm sure he's still doing what he was doing last year, being a great wide receiver for him. And like I said, I haven't said Webb, so I can't really say a lot, but that was a good win for Webb. That was their – what's the record now?
They're now 2-1 on the season.
2-1 with the loss coming from, was it Freedom Cowboys or was it that Alabama team?
It was New Life, the team down in Alabama. They're about an hour and a half, I believe, west of the Freedom Cowboys.
Yeah, so they're 2-1. They still have a chance to make it to the playoffs. There's a lot of teams like that, though. We're kind of in that point in the season where teams are going to start breaking off and teams are going to start going up forward, and some are going to be taking a step down. So interested to see the game next week.
Yeah, and you're right about them still being in playoff contention because they haven't played any games in the South yet. They have their first game in the South on Friday, which, of course, we'll talk about that in our analysis of the games after our interview with Scott Dorset. All right, so here's the big win in the North you're talking about. Christian Community School, a dominant win, 68-0 over Riverside. I mean, from what we saw of Riverside against the Falcons of Franklin Christian, it was about the same blowout, and the Knights managed to get one score in there. But it's really hard to say what Riverside's status is as of now. I mean, they have two division games left. At this point, looking at their record on the rest of the season, because they're facing two teams in the North, or make that three teams in the North in the rest of the season and only two in the South. And looking at the teams they are facing, I honestly could say I don't know if they're going to make the bowl game. It's possible they can pull an upset and they can prove us wrong, but looking at the strength of the teams that they're going to be facing, they may not even be able to make the bowl game this year as they have in prior years. But, I mean, Christian Community just staying dominant, and that's why I've said it's big in the North here, Trent, is because Christian Community and South Haven, both of them are undefeated, and they face each other on the 29th. But next week, this coming weekend, South Haven has a bye week, and Christian Community, they travel to Bowling Green Christian Academy to face off against them. And we know how much you enjoy Bowling Green, how much you said about them. That's going to be a good game, which we'll get to when we preview our games, of course. But just for Christian Community to dominate Riverside, I mean, is that what we've seen? Is that just kind of what we've expected from Riverside, or is it more of a surprise for Christian Community to dominate as much?
CCS is the Alabama of MTAC, and that's kind of true, because like you hear CCS and you're like, oh, that's CCS. Oh, that's gonna be a rough game. And I honestly believe that's mostly because of their defensive line. Like I've seen so far in MTAC from watching it more closer than I've ever done before. If you have a dominant defensive line, you're gonna do good in MTAC. Let's look at FCA. Let's look at CCS. Let's look at Sewanee. And play teams like that. If you have a dominant defensive line, you're gonna do good in MTAC. But and it will. And with Riverside, I know they got I know they have that huge 8th grader. And I don't remember the grade on their other linemen, but I'm just going to say they're young. I'm probably wrong. But from the games I've seen, their line didn't show anything to me that they were amazing. So with Riverside, I'm sure CCS put the pressure on, I believe, Trahan, right? The quarterback Trahan. Sorry that I don't know everything. With college and everything, it's hard to remember every player. But right now, CCS versus that game, CCS from Riverside, I'm sure CCS put on that D-line, that dominant D-line that they have with Webb and Rollins and Zapata. I'm sure they just went after that quarterback, and that's why the game was so out of proportion. But with Riverside, I'm thinking if you're going to look at your games and you're going to go ahead and give them an L, which I'm not going to go ahead and say they're losing them games. I'm never like that. Any team has a chance. Like, I'm saying Vanderbilt's going to beat Alabama. It's probably not going to happen, but I'm still going to say it. But so I'm not going to – I wouldn't – Riverside, they still have a chance to win a couple more games. But if they don't, you need to start playing your younger guys. Give them some burn for next season.
Yeah, and of course we mentioned with both of these teams that Christian Community they have the chance to win the MTAC North for the first time in several years. So their team looking for a revival going back into the season. And James now back in studio. Now, James, we did mention here to Trent that both South Haven and Christian Community are undefeated, and they face each other in 2 weeks. South Haven has a bye to prepare for that, but the Colts have a game at Bowling Green. We know both teams know what's at stake going into that game in 2 weeks, but is it more detrimental for Christian Community to travel up to Bowling Green and then come back to host South Haven? But essentially, how big of a game is this going to be? Not just on the playoff impact, but I mean for both of the players to see each other.
Talking about the South Haven Christian Community. Yeah, it's really not. First off, the travel to Bowling Green is not. I mean, you got kids in White House to go to Western all the time. It's about a 45-minute drive. It's not bad. It's, I wouldn't even classify it as a road trip, really. Now, I do want to clarify. Christian Community did win the North in 2015 because they hosted Classical. But no, they didn't last year. But, yeah, it's this game has a major impact on the playoffs, like you said. Now, Lighthouse Christian, we talked about it earlier. They've got a game against Bowling Green in 2 weeks, and then they play Hendersonville Christian. No, they don't play Hendersonville Christian. They're not playing him. They play Bowling Green in 2 weeks after playing Riverside on Friday. They're off on the 6th, I believe it is. They have South Haven on the 13th, and then they have Christian Community. So, essentially, if they beat Bowling Green and South Haven, they'll have the second seed in the playoffs. And if they beat Christian Community, they can win the North. They only have to win 3 games to win the North. Whereas it's a lot tougher for the teams in the South. You got 16. You got to beat 5 teams to get the first place. North, you only got to beat 3. So, 4 technically in the South. But, no, this is a huge ball game. South Haven, we'll talk about it a lot more next week, of course. But South Haven, their quarterback situation a little iffy. Xavier Vincent did a really good job filling in Friday night from what I understand. And so it'll just be a matter of which team is on a roll more. The game will be at CCS. And so, South Haven obviously is going to have to adjust for the small field. They played on it in the Jamboree when they participated in it. But that's something that teams have to adjust for is that small field at Christian Community, that traditional 8-man size. Yeah,
traditional, even though their school has talked about several times widening the field and making it a 50 by 100, but of course that hasn't happened yet. You say it's traditional, you think
it's a possibility. I mean, there's a lot of factors, where they would extend the field. You have a light pole and a scoreboard out there, so you have to adjust those, you have to reposition those. I'd say traditional. South Haven could have a 100-yard field over here at Martin Luther King Jr. Park, and they use it. They have an 80. Hendersonville plays on an 80. I believe Madisonville played on an 80, and there's one other team that plays on an 80, and it's slipping my mind. But anyways, it's to the point where I think Classicals maybe be 80. Bowling Green plays on an 80. That's right. It's all the teams up north. They all play on 80. But it's something that it's something that you have to adjust for.
Yeah, and we'll see, of course, how Christian Community does next week in their game traveling up to Bowling Green. But the next game that we broadcast on Friday night, St. Andrew Sewanee beat Franklin Classical School 34-14. Now, we've said this before, and the score doesn't necessarily reflect the game that we've seen. It doesn't necessarily determine if it was a blowout or is a good beating or anything like that. And we talked about this post game, is that both Sewanee and Franklin Classical put up a really good fight in this match, Trent. It was almost tied 14-14 at the end of the first half, but it was Sewanee who managed to get that touchdown in the final expiring seconds of the first half, which led them to be 21-14. And Swanee especially, they have that field goal kicker that we didn't really necessarily know about. So it was a good game to see. Unfortunately, Franklin Classical did not get any points after the first half. But I mean, both of these teams very skilled and such. But now Swanee did the score and everything that went on in that game. Do they deserve to be in first place in the North right now?
Yes, they do.
Wait, you mean the South?
Yes, I mean the South. Yes, do they deserve to be first place in the South?
Yes, they do. And I know one thing the Sewanee head coach is going to love me saying this, but they actually threw the ball. Can you believe it? Sewanee threw the ball for a whole entire half. Can you believe that?
I didn't think your voice could get that high, but I believe it now.
Yeah.
No, but it's like, if Swanee came out and threw that ball in the second half, that might be a game plan they want to stick to. But because for 3 games, all they did was run. Quarterback had run for 450 yards. He had tried 6 passes, had an interception. Teams had started to just hone in on the run, and they'd bring 8 guys in the box. I'm sure that's what Classical did on the first half. Just bring everybody in, just focus on stopping that run. If Sewanee all of a sudden in the second half, or sprinkle it throughout the game, all of a sudden you can switch and throw a pass and switch to a passing attack, even out of the same formation, that's a whole nother animal that teams have to get ready for.
And it wasn't, you just commented on that, but it wasn't just the teams that they're going up against. The whole entire league was like, they're just a running team. It shocked everyone that they were starting to throw the ball. And it's a very smart coaching game plan. All right, yeah, let's run it. Let's run it for 3 weeks straight, or how many ever weeks straight they did. Let's run. Let's get everyone thinking we're a running dominant team. And then let's come out here and throw the ball. Show them that we got both weapons and we can use them both, and we can use them successfully. And I just want to mention real quick, because if anybody's wondering on the predictions, we both picked CCS on that last week. But James, you got something to say?
Well, I was just going to mention for Classical, Swanee had a big win, but Classical hung in there. And in the second half, it seemed like, I don't know, you guys were at the game, but it seemed like they almost just – did they give up? I mean, was it like they – or were they outmatched? Because I know it was Classical – there were a lot of seniors on that roster. It was the opposite of our Bowling Green Heat game last night. That one last night, we only had 5 seniors total between both rosters. The Classical Swanee, there had to be at least 15 seniors, if not more, between the 2 rosters. I mean, just senior-heavy teams. And so – it would seem like there would be more leadership from Classical guys that have played there for 4 years or 3 years, and they've gone through several games like this where it's going to be tight, but they just couldn't pull it out. So Swanee for 2 years in a row, they're going to beat Classical, and that was huge because Classical now faces an uphill fight. Even it's highly likely that they get the number 1 seed. They are 2-0 in the conference. But they still have to beat Franklin Christian. They got to beat Webb, and I think those 2 are going to be battles for those guys. Of course, they'll see Webb Friday night, and that'll kind of determine at this point, playoff standings, as well as the FCA Swanee game that is coming up on Friday at 4.
And I just got to say one thing about FCS: they should not be upset. They shouldn't, because they fought to the fourth quarter, and I love games like this. Sewanee and FCS both fought to the end of the fourth quarter. And that's one thing I love watching about football. And that you can tell that they're conditioned, that the coaches keep their players conditioned. It's just it didn't look like the game, like the score. They won by, 10 or 20?
It's 34-14 to 20.
Okay. And the game didn't really seem like that. It's just some things, and I want to say there wasn't a lot of mistakes on that game. I mean, I'm sure both coaches told me that they were happy with the way their players played. The head coach, his name's slipping my mind, but the head coach for FCS told me Seth Williams.
Witherington.
I'm sorry, Coach, if you're listening. But he told me that it was a bit of his fault that they were kind of laid back during the practices, and he said that he ain't gonna do that again. And I compliment him on saying that, taking a little bit on his part, but I do. And that was a well-fought game. Probably, we had 2 great games we broadcast this week.
Yeah, and we'll have greater games to broadcast this Friday, which will reveal those as we analyze the rest of the games. But, of course, John Hargis, the head coach for Swanee, did mention in our post-game interview with him, he did say, well, Trent's going to be happy because we actually passed the ball. He mentioned that to us, and that's what I was saying to some other coaches. I think you mentioning that they didn't pass as much, that got him thinking maybe we should pass. But kudos to Swanee for taking the lead in the South as of now, but they still have that challenge, as James said, with FCA on Friday and then Webb the next week. So they'll look at that.
Swanee's got Webb on rivalry week. That's the last week of the season. That's rivalry night. That's the battle of the board. What are you talking about, boy? They got Madisonville next week.
Rivalry week.
Anyways.
All right,
that's not as bad as you going.
Anyways, let me just see here. Yeah, you're right. That's Webb during not rivalry week. I thought you said it was that game or something, but all right. So Saturday game that I was not at, Bowling Green Christian Academy. The Warriors beat the Tennessee Heat. They beat the Tennessee Heat 36-18.
Can't say they suck on this shit.
You stink.
Anyways.
36-18 victory for the Warriors over the Heat. Now that game, I need to go back and watch and see the analytics on that. But from what we've seen of the Heat, they are a team that likes to fight back and try to still get some points on the board, as we saw in the FCS game. Because the Knights, they like to score quick, but the Heat kept fighting back to avoid that mercy rule. So the clock, it wasn't a running clock the entire game in that, obviously. So I mean, both of those, there
was no running clock in it.
Yeah, no running clock at all. That's a good thing. We like those types of games. But a 36-18 victory. Was the score reflective in this game of what you guys saw?
So here's the scoring breakdown. Bowling Green Christian took the opening kickoff. They drove down the field and scored. Now, it took them 4 minutes. I mean, it took a good long drive. But Gage Holman finally punched it in, and they took an 8-0 lead. And then the Heat actually came right back with a drive of their own and scored. Bowling Green came back and scored, and so at halftime it was 12-8, but only 12-8 for the entire first half. No, I'm sorry. Bowling Green scored, Heat scored, and then Sam Wills, an 8th grader from the Heat, took a pick six, 80 yards for a touchdown. And then Bowling Green got the ball back and threw another interception to Wills again. So he had 2 interceptions on the night. But then after that, both of their offenses kind of stalled. They had some good drives, but both of their offenses kind of stalled. The Heat ended up having a blocked punt. They had a punt that went over the center's head, and so it went all the way back inside the red zone. There was like the 5-yard line. But after halftime, Heat came out, made it an 18-8 ball game because they got the opening second half kickoff. But then after that, it was 8. So they scored 24 unanswered points, Bowling Green did, and just came back to win it. And the Heat only scored the 1 touchdown there at the beginning of the second half. But the Heat had opportunities to score throughout the game. They never gave up. They never quit. They were making plays. Tanner Brown was on his heels the entire night because that Heat defensive line was putting pressure on him, and they were eating his lunch. He was having to tuck the ball and design pass plays. The running game, they had some good runs for touchdowns, but then they had runs that would just get stuffed automatically. Both teams had a lot of 4th downs that they went for that they didn't convert. So the score, it was reflective of the game, especially near the end where Bowling Green kind of pulled away. But it was a tight ball game for at least 3 quarters. I mean, it was neck to neck. It was a good ball game, like you said. We had 2 great ball games this weekend that we broadcasted. I was excited to see this one, and I'm excited to see these 2 teams going forward. I hate that the Heat couldn't get their first win. Congratulations to Bowling Green on the win. Now, keep this in mind. They beat Madisonville and they beat the Heat. They're not from the MTech North, so they still have to beat their MTech North opponents, and that starts Friday.
Yeah, and I want to say something. Bowling Green, with their first drive, they came out and it looked like they drove the ball pretty well. They drove the ball, and then after that drive, I saw the D-line coach get with his defensive lineman and show. And like I know, I really like defensive line, but the D-line coach for Heat got with them, and then he gave them a few pointers on what they should do differently. And then after that, the D-line was a factor during that game. They were back there every single time he dropped back for the pass. And that's a little bit to do with Bowling Green because it has kind of a young line. They have a freshman starting there, and some other guys. I'm sorry that I forget. Like I said, I need to do a little bit more studying of the rosters.
Who's that?
Does Bowling Green have a young line? I know they got a freshman starting.
Starting line, I believe they have a freshman and a sophomore and a freshman, a sophomore, and I believe there's a senior starting on the line as well. DJ Priestmeyer.
That's correct. You're right about that. But yeah, Heat, and then it was 12-8 going into the half, and I thought Heat was they were looking really well, but then momentum shifted. It did a complete flip-flop because the momentum went to Bowling Green, and then it went away from the Heat. And that was a really good game. And I got to say sorry for anybody that missed that game because you missed a great game.
And, it was when the Heat pulled away 18-8, that was a great moment for the organization. These guys have been beat up. They had to go through a co-op last year. 2 years ago, they won, I think, 3 games, maybe 4. And I know they beat Bowling Green, and they beat a couple teams that went winless. I think they beat Swanee. So they have not had a good ball game against a good opponent in a while. And Bowling Green is a good opponent, and they were able to hold their own against Bowling Green, at least for 3 quarters. Their defensive coach, I know you probably heard it. He was talking about playing a cover 2 defense and having a safety back there. And if you're going to play Bowling Green, take note, guys. If you're going to play Bowling Green, they're a passing attack. If you drop a safety back, that's going to be their Achilles heel. CCS did that to him last year. It was a tight ball game until halftime. CCS dropped the safety back, and it was over in the second half. So if you're facing a majority passing attack and your front line is good, drop a safety back, and that's going to help y'all. That was your coaching advice brought to you by James.
I don't remember if we did the predictions for the last week for the game we just went over. But I do know this Bowling Green Heat game, I picked Bowling Green, James picked Heat, but I just remembered James picked SAS and I picked FCS. So we're tied this week with 3-3.
And I'll say this about the predictions. First off, those were beginning of the season. I was just basing it off of what I knew from practices and last season. But for 3 quarters, it looked like I could have gotten the prediction right. It was 18-8. And I had the prediction at that point, and Bowling Green just came back and won the ball game. That didn't mean I picked the game. I mean, I obviously picked the game wrong, but that didn't mean that I picked one. I've had games where I picked a team and it went the completely opposite way, and I was just completely wrong. I wasn't completely wrong. Bowling Green showed up and played a complete ball game. They showed up in the 4th quarter and did what they had to do to pick up that dubs.
Now, at the end of the day, James, you were wrong in your prediction, no matter what justification you put forward.
I was wrong in my prediction.
In his defense, he just said it was a toss-up game, and that's kind of what it was.
I did say it was a toss-up, and it was a toss-up until the 4th quarter. So, there we go.
Yeah, and one other thing I do want to say before we get into our special interview today, you mentioned that there was an 80-yard interception, an 80-yard pick six by an 8th grader. I had, after the FCA game, the head coach for the JV team for Franklin Christian Academy, Casey Jorgensen now, or one of the coaches there. I believe he's assistant coach to Shaka Hale for that. He mentioned me. He said, come on, guys, 8-man extreme, cover JV football and such. We got a game against Riverside on Tuesday and such. Now we have no plans yet to do any middle school games. It's possible, but we're not sure yet. But after seeing hearing an 8th grader do a pick six for 80 yards, that was only on that was in a varsity game.
He had 2 interceptions, and he ran the ball pretty consistently.
Yeah, so that might be our motivation to go into JV games, James.
Or it might be a motivation to have a Young Stars All-Star game 6th through 8th grade. Anyways, no, but actually, if you guys want great JV coverage, go check out our friend Jonathan Thompson with Tennessee 8-Man Weekly. It's a podcast he does every Tuesday night, and he's growing the thing. I do want to tell you guys, he updated the pick'em that we have our predictions. He's making his predictions. Updated 8-Man Extreme 20-7, Tennessee 8-Man Weekly 18-9. So we lead by 2 games.
Yeah, high five. Anyway, but it's just a friendly competition, just to see, just for bragging rights.
And to be fair, when James says we lead, he means he leads because he made these predictions preseason.
This is a team effort.
This is.
I have my own prediction.
All right.
It would be like 9-20
I came in at week 3, James.
or 20-7. 7. You might be 0-27.
Yeah, all right.
Bowling Green
One last thing before we get into our interview. Mr. Trent Legate here has his hit list from this week. Trent?
Yeah, I'm adding 3 new players to the hit list. And this guy, he performed really well in the Bowling Green Heat game. He had 2 picks, 1 pick six, 8th grader Sam Wills, number 11 with the Heat. He performed and he outperformed everybody else on the field. That's what made me put him on the hit list. And then Gage Bowman, number 7 with Bowling Green. He was their offensive. He was their Boyne
Holman.
Oh crap!
I think you said Bowman.
I did. Yeah, it's Holman right here. Wow, I did not read that right.
I'll cut rude.
All right. Yeah, he was their offense. He was the offensive guy, and he had a pick 6 as well. 2 pick 6s in this game. We forgot to say that there's 2 pick 6s in the Bowling Green Heat game. Gage Holman made my hit list. And for week 6, and then Blaze SAS was the guy that was taking control of the running back position rather than Thons being out for the SAS game. He ran the ball very well. He made an impact on the game, impact enough to make my hit list. And that's all I got for week 6.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for us to always have these interviews and have people on the show, especially for Kentucky RV Sales to sponsor our interviews. So Kentucky RV Sales interview is with the former president of the Middle Tennessee Athletic Conference and the athletic director for the Webb School, Mr. Scott Dorset. Scott, how about them Titans? Looks like we may have some technical issues here with Scott Dorset. Let's just check real quick and make sure he's on here. All right, looks like he has his mic muted. Let me just check something real quick. James stole for me.
In the meantime, we do want to remind y'all. I don't know if you guys have talked about this, but quick commercial. 2017 Extreme All-Star Game, November 11th. It's coming up. Make sure you put it on your calendar. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Am I on here now? Sorry, again.
Yes, sir.
Us old people don't, it takes a little while technology to sink in.
No, it's perfectly fine, my man. But to answer my question, I asked you, how about them Titans?
Yeah, I tell you what, I was a little worried. In the start of the season last week, I said, man, this could be a long one. But it looks like they woke up today a little bit. It's 115 degrees down on the field, they said. Jesus,
hot temperatures down in Jacksonville, and they think they just had that all flooded out a little bit earlier. It's good that everybody was safe from there, of course. All right, Scott, so let's get right into this. First off, you guys are 2-1 now, a big win for you guys on this past weekend against Riverside. The big win for you guys against Madisonville. This was your first this was your second in-conference game, this was your second out-of-conference game on the season. You had one in-conference game against Hendersonville. Let me ask you, with your loss against New Life, 64-49, and then to come back and win to another team out of conference, what was the kind of mindset with the team going into this game against Madisonville?
Well, I think they were just a little upset with themselves. We drove all the way down there to Alabama and played a very, very solid team. Quarterback reminded me of Lorenzo from Kentucky back in the day. I mean, he was dropping dimes out there to receivers, and they were well covered. And we jumped out in that game 24-7. But you score 49 points and you have 7 turnovers. It's kind of tough, and you feel like you've kind of beat yourself. They were big. They were physical. I thought we really, really outplayed them. But again, it doesn't matter. And at the end of the game, if their score is higher than yours, then you're going home with a loser. So I think our kids kind of understood that, listen, we've got a great team here. We first night out at Hendersonville had a good outing, and we've put up about 150 points now, I think, in 3 games. And so we've got a lot of great weapons. So I think when they came into this, what I got out of it mostly on Friday was, our starters kind of started off, but a bunch of our kids, younger kids, had a great opportunity to get in there and grow up and get some playing time. And it was also Parents Weekend, so they got to play in front of their parents. So that was pretty cool. But I think everybody on the team pretty much played on Friday night, which was just a great opportunity for your kids to grow. Madisonville is, Lord, we've been there, and I talked to their head coach, and I said, don't feel like you're the Lone Ranger. I remember when we first started our program at Webb, we were in that same boat, and we've been blessed enough to grow every year. So I think it was a good win. Starters didn't play a whole lot, but they got a few reps in. I think, again, I heard you guys talking, and I hope we keep being the little unforgotten team down there and the kind of sleeping dog in the woods. But I guess we're going to find out on Friday night. I think that's going to be a big game, and I know both teams will be ready for it.
Yeah, you guys face the Franklin Classical School Knights on Friday night, so that's going to be a big game in the South for you guys. We'll ask you more in depth about that later. But I do have one question for you. You're on the board for MTAC. Can you arrange for the semis to be one in the afternoon, one at night, and the bowl game the next day so that we can broadcast all 3? Because we had this issue last year. I know this is more one of those facetious questions, and I talked to the MTAC president, Tim Pettit, about it as well. Because we had this issue last year that we had 3 good games going on in the same night starting at the same time last year, the bowl game and both of the MTAC semis. So we had those games going on, and it was a matter of choosing which games to broadcast. Is there any way that you can arrange it so that not only we can cover all of those games, but so that everybody in the conference can view all of those games and be able to see what's going to happen in the championship?
Well, hopefully, I think that this season, if I'm not mistaken, our bowl game is on the Friday, and then the consolation championship game is on Saturday. I'm pretty sure that's the way it's laid out. So hopefully that'll help some. And again, we're still in communication. It won't happen this year. It will for the last game of our season. We're playing at the college again against Swanee when we go up there to play them for the end of the season game. But we're trying to get them to, and I think they're very open to it, hosting our championship games there at the college on the turf. And hopefully next year that'll be in place, and maybe we can get a long-term. I just think it would be a great venue to kind of culminate everything that's gone on during the season. And I'm excited that we're going to have it all at Webb this year. I think we got a good venue to host something like that, but I would really love to have a neutral site like that. And I know Tim, we've talked about it, would too. So, but if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that the bowl game is on Friday, and then the consolation and championship games are on Saturday.
Well, that's good news. That way we can get both of those. Hey, Scott, this is James.
Hey, James.
Hey. So I'm not sure how much football you've kept an eye on, or how many games you've been able to keep up with. But is there a trend that you're seeing with the season so far? Because coming into the season, obviously, it was kind of wide open, a little more wide open than it has been in the past. But I think several teams have kind of separated themselves as contender. We've seen the contenders and the pretenders, and I think that's kind of sorted themselves out. That's kind of sorted itself out so far. But is there a trend or kind of something that you've seen this season that is either positive or negative?
The only thing that has concerned me, and we've talked about it in board meetings and everything else, is that I'd like to see. We're all small schools, and the one thing that TSSAA did a very good job of is they didn't do a good job across the board, and I continue to hound them that we should have 3 classifications in Division II. They did make 3 classifications in football for 11-man. The one thing that I'd like to see in MTAC is that we would be a little bit more consistent with our teams. The one reason we ended up going back down to Alabama this year is because Pleasant View, didn't have a team at the last kind of second. So we're scrounging, in the summer, at the end of the summer, to try to find a team. And I also think that as a group of schools, we just need to do a better job also of, I don't care if you're in the north or south. And one of the things we're looking at for next year is that we're, instead of having a north and a south, just having a one conference there and open up where, everybody ought to be playing each other, because it's getting really hard to get games, and if somebody, be it right, wrong, or different, they think your team's strong, well, they don't want to play you. And, so now you're left with holes and that luckily Madisonville was very, very and I really, really appreciate them. That we had an opening right there, and this was our Parents' Day weekend. That wouldn't have been too cool to have an open date there. We'd have had 2 straight open dates, and we've only played 3 games so far this season. So the one thing that I'd like to see is our conference be more consistent across the board. I think we got some great schools. I think you see the ones that are kind of stepping up to the forefront and doing what they need to do. But even the ones that maybe they're not having the greatest year, they still we got to have that commitment and that buy-in that, we know on a year-to-year basis that, hey, they're going to be there. And I'm just, I pray on a daily basis that we get to that point, because I think that's one thing that keeps people in other schools cautious about the MTAC is, why do I want to jump in there? And then next year, I don't even know if there's going to be enough teams to play.
Yeah, that's for sure. And looking at the other conference that's here in Tennessee that handles small schools, the TACS, that's a problem that they've never had because they have had the same teams that have been in that conference for years. And so they don't have to worry about year to year who's going to be in there. Now football was a little bit different, but there are other sports they're a little more consistent in that. But football, yes, for sure. And you stay up to date with the TSSAA, and you mentioned the classifications. A team like Concord Christian, of course, they're in Knoxville. It'd be a little bit of a travel. But someone like them where they're 0 and I believe it's 0-22 or 0-23 or Easel Harding, I know they're struggling and have for several years. I ask you this every time I talk to you, but is there a team that is either currently in the conference or that is maybe TSSAA, at least in football right now, and could potentially come play 8-man to kind of keep their football program going? Is there any that you know?
Well, I know there's some Pickett County, some of these schools that are even public, believe it or not. And unfortunately, we're in the South, and 8-man is still not caught on completely. You tell them that. I've even got people that are on my board of trustees, and they almost think you say 8-man, and they think it's kind of a joke. And, it's huge out in the Midwest. So it really hadn't just totally latched on here in the South. It's starting to. I think there's tons of teams that are small enough that are going, hey, I wish we had a venue that we could play football where, that number issue would not be a factor. A great example is when I first came on, the Swanee, St. Andrews, was playing in, and this is before they had 3 divisions. It was just 2. So they're playing FRAs and BGAs, and well, not BGA at that time. They were playing FRA and all the other teams that were in our conference. And they were getting their eyes beat out. I mean, Friday night, 60-0. I remember many times talking and they said, man, we just can't keep our kids motivated. Nobody wants to go out and get beat like that every Friday night. And that's when, we were just venturing into 8-man football, and as we were just starting out, and they stepped down into it. And I think they'll tell you it's probably been the best decision they ever made, because look what they're doing this year. It's given them an opportunity to build some excitement back into their program and to look around and say, hey, we can play this game right here. And I know TSSAA's looked real hard even at 8-man football. There's a lot of small rural schools and a lot of small private schools that would benefit from this because, again, you might, we've had teams of 40, but we've also had teams of 18. So, the numbers fluctuate, a bunch. And then I think it's just a great avenue for some people. So I do think there's probably some teams that would love to play 8-man football. But again, it's getting over that stereotypical, we're in the South, we play 11-man football. And, that's the hurdle we're trying to jump over now.
Yeah, and I think that, like you mentioned, schools that are currently TWSAA, I think it's for them just realizing as well that, a school like St. Andrew Sewanee or you guys, where every other sport or the majority of your sports are TWSAA, but it's just for a sport that you struggle in, you go play in a venue and in an atmosphere that that you guys can be successful, and that way across the board in all your sports, you're successful.
I agree.
Yeah, and last question for you, Scott. We kind of refer to it a little bit as the unfortunate kind of dark history of MTAC, and just a little bit sad. But you're co-champions with FCA last year after all the circumstances that happened with that and such. As the athletic director, I don't know if James may have had the chance to ask you this off of the show or anything, but being co-champions going into this year, obviously every school is more hungry to become the undisputed non-co-champion. Just straight up, our school is the champions of football. As the athletic director of of the school that's co-champions and such, what kind of message have you been giving to the boys on this season coming from that, as well as what message have you been giving to your coaches and the rest of the athletic department from that?
Well, I think it is what it is. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. I think the conference did the best thing it could do to, with all the circumstances, which were, like you said, that were ugly. And unfortunately, not only in football, but even in basketball, it reared its kind of ugly head. I think that we have tried our best to alleviate those problems from happening in the future. But, again, I don't think you can dwell on that. I think you got to say, hey, we were fairly young last year. We lost some good seniors, but we got a bunch of at Webb, we got a bunch of great athletes that are juniors and seniors this year. And you just got to, you got to say, guys, it's time to, pull up our boots and let's move forward and see where we can shake this thing out this year. And, it was what it was last year. And we were blessed enough to have an opportunity to even get in that championship game and be able to play in it. And, you just kind of let that go and move forward, because it's, anytime you say anything, it kind of gives you a bitter taste in your mouth as far as, well, did I really win this outright? And, at our school 3 years before that, we'd won, outright championship and then moved on to down in Dayton, Tennessee. So I just think you got to kind of put it in perspective, enjoy what you did accomplish, and then just move on and think about what's in front of you instead of what's behind.
All right, well, we appreciate you coming on the show, Scott, and best of luck to you guys on Friday night in your game against the Knights, your home opener, actually. So your second home game, of course. Yeah, best of luck to you guys on Friday night.
Are you guys coming to this game?
We will reveal if we are or not in just a few moments, so stay tuned to the show.
Yes, we will be. They'll be down there. We might need you to move the game to 7:15 though, because they're going to Sewanee at 4. So they're going to try to shoot down the mountain and make it to you guys. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we had to move it a little bit this week. They got caught in a little bit of traffic from Madisonville, which is a haul. So just kind of keep me informed. Let me know. We'll see what we can do.
All right. Well, once again, Coach, thank you for tuning on, and we'll see you Friday night.
All right. Appreciate all you guys do and getting the word out for 8-man football and for MTAC. I think it's extremely important, and what you guys have done is just a great testimony to trying to build this sport, which I think is great. So I really thank you for all your time and all the efforts that you guys put into it.
Well, we appreciate it, man. Thank you. And as James and I always say, it's the coaches who make everything possible, including athletic directors. It's you guys who make everything that we do possible, but we appreciate it, man. Thanks again.
All right. Take care.
You as well. All right, that was Scott Dorset, the athletic director for the Webb School, on the show today. And now it's time to get into our game predictions. We're going to go for about an hour and a half today in our show. It's going to be
Spencer, that fantastic interview with Scott Dorset. Who was that made possible by?
As we said in the beginning, it was Kentucky RV Sales. If you go to kyrvsales.com, go to their website or search them up on Facebook, you can see some of their good sales. We keep posting about it on Instagram and stuff as well, but you shouldn't have to post. We shouldn't have to post about it on our social media if you're following them already. You're getting double advertisement on there. But yeah, Kentucky RV Sales in Madisonville, Kentucky. They actually just opened a service and parts center, and they could pay cash if you have a used RV, so you can get some extra cash there if you don't use your RV anymore. If you call Mike and his team at 270-821-4000, they will get you a good deal, or they'll get you a deal that you saw on their social media page. So just go to kyrvsales.com or search them up on Facebook. So that's Kentucky RV Sales bringing us our interviews. All right, Trent and James, it's time for the sacred predictions that everyone tunes in to listen to. One of the many reasons that they tune in to listen to us is our predictions for the week. As always, we start with the top of the football schedule and go to the bottom. Bowling Green Christian Academy, this is for the 22nd, obviously, for this week. Bowling Green Christian Academy be hosting the Christian Community School Colts. Now, we've seen both of these teams. How Bowling Green, they almost won their first game that we covered to them with Swanee, and it ended up being the final seconds where Swanee got a touchdown there, and Christian Community has stayed undefeated. So Bowling Green has had a little bit of struggles throughout their season, but I think that, now this is just going on a limb here, I think that there may be an upset, or this may be an intense game, especially with Christian Community. Although they're right next to Bowling Green and traveling is an issue, I think this may be the week that Bowling Green shocks the conference and potentially gets a win against Christian Community. But James, I'm sure that with your predictions, such not just going off of preseason, but also with what you've seen of them, I'm sure you're going to be thinking that Christian Community is just going to hold strong.
Here's the thing. I mean, I can't say that I disagree with your prediction. Then again, any Friday night could give us any upset. Christian Community, yeah, they have 3 shutouts in a row, and they've looked really, really strong. Of course, 44-0, 58-0, 68-0. But they played Freedom, who is currently 1-4. They played Hendersonville Christian, who's currently 2-3, and they played Riverside, who is now 0-5. So they've played 3 teams in a row that are struggling. They have yet to have solid competition, at least since the FCA game, where there were a lot of injuries. And if you look over the course of the season and the way their teams have gone, of course they have Classical later on in the year. They got South Haven next week. They haven't played Swanee. They don't play Swanee. They don't play Webb. And so they're gonna, and the North is not the strongest conference. And so they have yet to play a team that is really going to test them, and they're going to get that Friday night. Bowling Green has shown that they can make a game out of stuff. Now, granted, I will say this: Bowling Green has won 2 games, but they've beat 2 winless teams. Nothing against either team. Madisonville is a growing team. The Heat, they're a growing team. They showed some fight, but they've beaten 2 winless teams. Gotta say something about that. When you lose to South Haven, who's undefeated, and then you lose to they lost to Swanee, who was undefeated. So they lose to undefeated teams and beat winless teams. So you got to factor that 2-2 record in there as well.
Excuse us. Trent just having a little bit of technical issues here, of course. We'll see if we can get him back up in just a moment. Yeah, Trent just trying to get his tech issues there, of course. James, as you said, there is something to say about them losing to lossless teams and or undefeated team. Well, Yeah, undefeated. That's right. We talked a little bit about your definition of undefeated and unbeaten, as they're two different things.
Unbeaten
is what CCS and South Haven and Swanee are right now. Undefeated is when you get to the end of the year. It's what the 2015 Patriots were. It's what Franklin Classical was in 2011. Undefeated means you get to the end of the year, have not lost. Unbeaten is a current running title until you get to the end of the year.
Yeah, so you're right. There is something to say about that, and if the pattern shows, then it may be that Christian Community gets another victory.
All right, y'all can hear me now? All right, so like y'all know how I'm picking Vanderbilt over Alabama. I'm gonna pick Bowling Green over CCS. Now, for that to happen, Bowling Green's line has to step up. You're going against probably the best defensive line in MTAC right now. Your offensive line is going to have to step up and give enough time for your passing game to percolate. I don't like saying percolate. Not a lot of people say it, but I like to say it.
That's a fun word to say, percolate.
It is. But you got to have time to give Brown enough time to throw the ball, because that's probably what they're going to be going off of, is throwing the ball. Because that's what probably one of the strongest assets is. And in doing that, you're going to have to give Brown enough time to be able to have that time to get the ball down the field, and enough time for your wide receivers to run the routes. So your offensive line is going to have to step up big this week. They didn't do that well against the Heat, this defensive line. So they got to step up big to give them any chance against CCS.
It's not just for the passing game. It's for the running game. If your offensive line can't block your quarterback, how do you think they're going to block a running play takes longer than a passing play to develop in most instances. You have to give the ball to the running back, and he's 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he's got to get to the line of scrimmage. That's 2 or 3 seconds that your defensive line, if your offensive line isn't doing their job, that's 2 or 3 seconds that they can make that stop, and they can shut down your running attack. Then you're going to be forced to pass, and that makes you go into a panic. So for Bowling Green, I think they have to do what they did last night against the Heat. They have to establish the run game. They have to get it settled. They have to be able to show that, you know what, we are not a one-dimensional team. We can run the ball. They ran the ball very well last night. But you saw what Christian Community did to the Heat. Christian Community whooped the Heat. And Christian Community is on a different level. I'm not talking from a homer. I'm talking from facts. They're 6-0. They're 6-0. They're hold on a second. Let me pull this up because I have this. They've allowed 42 points this season. 42 points in 6 games. These guys have a
7
defense,
points per game.
If everyone scored, but they've had 3 shutouts in a row. So this defense is clicking on all cylinders. Granted, they haven't played good teams, but they're clicking on all cylinders. They've put up 344 points. This defense is going to have their hands full with this ball club. These two teams are going to go at it. Christian Community has won the last 2 years, and so Bowling Green is going to look to get on the winning side with this series. And a win here would be a massive, massive upset because they've lost to South Haven. Now, South Haven, they made a lot of mistakes. There was a big loss. They made a lot of mistakes. And it was their second game of the year, but they were coming off that Swanee game. So if they could stay mistake-free, they could potentially have a chance. If they pull this upset off, it's going to throw everything into a jumble. But I don't see them beating Christian Community.
Yeah, but for me, I don't actually make any predictions. I'm just throwing it out there because any upset can and might happen. But James saying he thinks Christian Community is going to win, and Trent thinking Bowling Green will get an upset. South Haven on their bye this week before they face Christian Community, essentially a battle for first place in the North, at least as the stands are now, because, again, Bowling Green could make an upset.
Hey, here's some good news about South Haven. They won't lose this week.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's one less wrong prediction from James.
Yeah, that is true.
You mean like Swanee Classical?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So South Haven on their bye this week. Hendersonville is also on their bye this week. They not having an opportunity to reschedule that game with Lighthouse because their bye weeks do not align, and this is the only break that Hendersonville has this week.
I didn't get a chance to interject on that Hendersonville South Haven game. I was busy taking care of something, but I've got to say something to the fight of Hendersonville. It was 20-6 at halftime. Third quarter, it was still a tight ball game. Coach went into the fourth quarter with 10 guys. He had 12 guys come to the suited for the game, and 2 were down with injuries. 10 guys, and they put up a heck of a fight against South Haven. You can't say enough about them just working their butts off, working their tails off. They've shown this over and over again. They will not quit. Christian community, they were just outmatched. But Webb, they kept fighting. Heat, they kept fighting in the second half and pulled away and got the victory. Madisonville, you guys were there. It's a tight ball game. They pulled away. This is a second half team that will work their tails off, and I hate that they're not going to be in the playoffs. I hope they schedule a game for that first night after the playoffs and give us another great ball game. I hate that they're not going to be participating in the playoffs. I would love to see this second half team get that opportunity, but that just opens the door for some of those guys to get an all-star nod and have the opportunity to come play up a date.
Yeah, and of course the All-Star game on November 11th will give our rosters for that within the next month or so. So the other game that we do have here for Week 7, these are the games in the North. Let's see. Looks like James having a little bit of a laugh over there for some reason. But Lighthouse Christian is hosting Riverside. Both of these teams are winless. Now, Lighthouse only winless because of their one loss. The only game they played this season was against FCA, and it wasn't a complete blowout. And as James mentioned with that game, or I believe James mentioned to me during that game, I don't think he was here when we went over that. But with Lighthouse FCA, the Lighthouse just made some unfortunate mistakes, dropped some passes and such. But James believes they're a solid ball club. And they're 0-1 going into this game against Riverside at 0 and let's see here, it looks like 0-5 right now. So unfortunately, Riverside, as I mentioned, doesn't look like they're going to get even the bowl game. They could if they won both of their South games and other teams lost, but it's they don't control their own destiny at this point. But Riverside can at least potentially get their first win on the season at Lighthouse. And Trent, you've seen Riverside here as well. We haven't seen Lighthouse yet. At least James did on Friday night and saw a little bit, but you and I haven't seen Lighthouse yet. You think Riverside may have the more chance here just based off of what we saw with that score with FCA?
Well, I'm going to give my prediction first and then go on to what you tell me. I'm going to be taking Riverside this week. I had Lighthouse marked for the win, but I just thought about some things. I'm going to take Riverside.
Hold on. If I can't change, you can't change. You go with your initial.
You pulled an executive order last week, though. You changed one of your picks.
Listen, buddy, okay? You just sit over there, all right? You sit over there and don't speak when I speak. Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, but back to what I was saying before I was really interrupted. I'm going to take Riverside over Lighthouse. I want to say this because this one guy impresses me so much of what all he can do on the field is Hall. He impresses me so much, I'm going to pick Riverside. And usually, football isn't a one-player sport. It's all 8 or 11 men on the field is the reason why they're going to be so good. But Hall is just such an impact player, and I haven't seen Lighthouse. And Riverside has that. They're on their which game is this for Riverside?
So 6th game this year.
Yeah, this is Riverside's 6th game. This is Lighthouse's 2nd. So I'm gonna take Riverside kind of based on that fact and Hall. And I haven't seen Lighthouse to really make my decision because they're kind of starting a little bit later. They're starting really late into the season.
Now I'm gonna stick with my preseason prediction. I have Riverside picked preseason. A lot of stuff factor into that. Now we can have the same prediction. No, with the Lighthouse game, there were just some first game mistakes for Lighthouse that Hendersonville made back in August. Heat made it. CCS. Everyone made those first game mistakes, and Lighthouse just happened to do it later in the year against a ball club that's on the or on the comeback from having a tough start. But these guys, there were only 11 suited up on Friday night. They've got 14 on their roster. But this is going to be a team that is going to scratch and claw. They've got a couple guys that have come back from last year, Ricky McDowell and Malik McMurray. Those guys were very impressive. Preston, I got to get his name. But McMurray was, they were taking deep shots with him. Parker Dillon was from Lighthouse, and he was hauling some balls in, had a lot of drops, but you're going to have that in a game situation. It's different when you go into a game, when you're in a practice and, it's just you and your quarterback and you're just throwing routes. That's different than having someone in your face trying to defend the ball. And so I think that now that they've gotten that first game under their belt, Coach DeJuan Sharp Jr., who we should have on the show next week, he's gotten an opportunity to coach his first 8-man game, and they've all had a chance to see how it's going to go. And I think Lighthouse, they've now got those jitters out. They've got the mistake, and I only call them jitters. It's just mistakes. It's not that they're a bad team, because I don't think they are. But I think they're going to come out against Riverside. They're going to have a strong showing. I don't know how this ballgame is going to go, but I'm going to be honorable, and I'm going to stick with my preseason prediction of Riverside. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that we have a great ball game. I don't know how it's going to go, but I hope we have a great ball game between these two.
Yeah, that's the home opener for Lighthouse on Friday, so we'll see how they perform in that. And those are the only teams active in the North, as he already went over. Bowling Green hosting Christian Community. And going on to the South, of course, as we said, Riverside going to Lighthouse. Now we get into our scheduled broadcast games, which James unfortunately spoiled to Coach Dorset when we said, hey, just wait to listen to the show, of course. But
Dorset is a busy man. And he asked us if we would be there, and we asked if he could move game time.
If he doesn't answer our questions, we don't answer his.
It's very satisfying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were absolutely great answers, of course. That's in the facetious. All right, so our first game that we're covering on Friday night, this is I believe our first and only doubleheader for this season, if I'm looking at the schedule right. Yes, this is our only doubleheader on the season that we have scheduled as of now. Is that first we will be going to...
We had the Swanee Bowling Green and then the Heat Classic. But it's the only one we have left.
Okay, so this is the only doubleheader we have left on the season. Last of 2 doubleheaders in one night. So St. Andrew Swanee hosting Franklin Christian Academy. We already talked about this. Swanee is in the lead in the South right now. They're first place. And I believe FCA is technically tied with them because they're 1-0 in the South. But in terms of, I believe it would default to how your regular season record is, including your division records by MTAC tie-breaking regulations. So I believe with that, that Swanee would take first place. But of course, that can be broken. Swanee can have their first loss dealt to them by FCA at home in a matinee game. But with what we've seen from FCA, of course, against Riverside, they absolutely have the potential to make an upset on Swanee. But it's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a good game for us to broadcast with the Mountain Lions hosting the Falcons. It's going to be a good game for our first of 2 games in a doubleheader. But for me, I'm sure James may say this, or he may go with his preseason games, but I'm sure both of these gents can agree here. This is a real toss-up game, at least at this point in the season.
Well, I'm going to just go ahead and say my predictions like I usually do. I'll just start off like that. Oh, this is hard because I really think Sewanee's coach is trying to make me a believer. But I'm going to take FCA. I'm going to take FCA. The defensive line is crazy. And, I say it a lot, but, their defensive line is crazy. It's going to be really hard for them to stop it. So I'm going to take FCA this game. FCA still has a chance to be number 1 at the end of the season. And if they keep on beating the teams in it's the South, right? Okay. If they keep on beating. So this is a big South game, so I don't know, James. I don't know who he's going to predict, but I'm going to stay with FCA.
I've got FCA picked as well based on preseason predictions. And this is another one where this is going to be a toss-up game. Swanee could win big. The game Friday night was a toss-up game as Trent tosses his hat in the air. This is a toss-up game, and this is a big game. If Christian can win this, Swanee is 3-0 in the South. If Christian can win this, they will stay unbeaten, and and they will stay unbeaten, and they will stay unbeaten, and they'll have a good path, if you want to say that, a good path to the playoffs. And Swanee is obviously, they're going to have some stuff happen. Both of these teams right now, their season's in their hands, and the opportunity to play with that number one seed and host the semifinal game, it's in their hands. A loss here takes that out of your hands. Classical right now has to have stuff happen. You know, they would be in the same seat, in the same boat with whoever loses Friday night, as well as Webb. If Webb loses, they'll be in the same boat. So, you know, this is an opportunity to keep your destiny and keep your season in your hands and not have to depend on, well, hopefully this team loses, and this team loses, and this team wins.
This is by far the most impactful weekend on the playoffs from the rest that I'm looking here at the schedule. Because if you look at Classical's schedule, they have Webb this Friday, and then they play at the Falcons in the last week of the season, but then they play Hendersonville, Christian Community, and then have a bye week. So they only have 2 more South games to try and prove themselves. So it was a really hard loss for them. That's what was at stake last night, is essentially sort of first place in the South going into the playoffs, because Swanee, regardless of if FCS wins their games out and if Swanee wins their games out, they still have that game on the Knights, and they would take first place in the South. But this weekend is really going to shape who's in the South hosting the semi and who's traveling for the semi in terms of Franklin Classical and St. Andrews Swanee. But of course, there's still a lot of things that we have to look at and such. And FCA's schedule as well. They only have FCS after the Swanee game. They have Webb, who they're hosting, which that'll be a good game as well, depending on how the results are. The FCA has Swanee, Webb, and FCS. So FCA essentially controls their destiny on if they want to either host a semi or even have a chance to be in the playoffs. So FCA controls their destiny, and we'll see how they do as they travel to Swanee at 4 p.m. And that's one of the extreme games of the week on Friday at 4 p.m. And it's a doubleheader for us because we will be traveling right over to the Webb School, who is hosting the Franklin Classical Knights. And as I just said, it's really impactful as we're in week 7 of 11 in the MTAC football season, because Webb is undefeated right now in MTAC play, because they've only played one team, and that's Hendersonville, and they're 1-0. But this is their first South game, and both the Knights they're coming out of a loss to the Mountain Lions, which is a little bit was a crucial win for them to potentially get that number 1 slot in the South. But now that Swanee has it on them, all they need to do now is essentially, looks like they just have to win out to get that number 2 seed, and hope that some other results happen with there. But Trent, we haven't seen Webb play. We've only seen the scores. But with them against FCS, I mean, it looks like this is going to be another one of those toss-up games because of how dominant both of these teams are.
Yeah, I would say it's a 50-50. And the team that wants it the most is going to come in and take the game. That's how I feel like this game is going to go. No team has more skilled players than the others. Both teams are, I believe, equal into what they are. But I'm going to take FCS on this game. They're second place in the South. They're showing us why they are. They had that game against SAS, and it was a good game. So, if they can stay that competitive, I'm going to take them over Webb. Then again, that's with me not seeing Webb. So, James, what's your prediction going to be?
Again, I'm going to stay faithful to my preseason prediction, and I have Franklin Classical picked in this game. I'm not going to change I have changed my predictions in the past, and I should not have. I should have stuck with what I had. I have Classical picked. The Webb School, they've played They played a tough ball club in New Life, and they hung in there with them. And if you track Alabama A&M football, New Life is having a great season. They've got a lot of great players. Scott Dorset talked about it. They played Hendersonville, who was a tough team, especially in the second half. They are not going to lay down for anybody, and they didn't lay down for Webb. They had a big win against Madisonville, who was struggling. So I'm not 100% sure what the identity of this team is. I give everyone 3 games, and then I kind of decide what the identity or kind of think about what I think the identity is. And they're a good ball club. They're a good ball club, but I don't know if they can beat Classical. They're coming off of a cotton candy game. And nothing against Madisonville, but they're not the toughest opponent. They're not. Just saying it. They're trying. They're building a program. I love the guys to death, but it was not a hard game. Like Coach said, a lot of his players were able to get in. Classical, on the other hand, they're coming off a stinging loss. They, like you said, Coach said they took some easy practices, and he's not going to do that again. These guys are going to be fired up. They know now. It's like I said, their season and their destiny is in their hands. Their playoff plans are now in 3 other teams' hands. They have to depend on those other teams. Some of them to lose and games to go. They do not control it. They're going to come into this game fired up saying, look, we're not going to lose 2 division games in a row. Second off, we just got beat at our place and in front of our fans, and we're not going to take another loss. They're a good ball team. They have 8 or 9 seniors that have all been together. Most of them have been together since their freshman year. They're going to be looking to have some fire in this ball game. I've got Classical picked. Like I said, sticking to preseason predictions, but I'm really excited for you guys to broadcast this game and to see what happens with this one.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to doing that doubleheader on Friday. We're not covering any North teams this week because there's only 3 games that are on there, and one of them is an interdivision game. The only other teams that are playing are CCS and Bowling Green. So we're seeing a lot more South action this time as it's really shaping up to be a really competitive South division for the MTAC playoffs. So Saturday night, we'll be traveling up to Mount Juliet. The Tennessee Heat, as is annotated here, they are hosting the Madisonville Defenders. Now, this is going to be a very intriguing game because both of these teams have not managed to get a win on their record yet. So one of these teams is going to break their winless streak, and we had this at the beginning of the season with the Patriots and the Defenders because both of them were on the Patriots were on, I believe, an 0-9 winless streak from the national championship in 2015. Then they went winless in 2016 and managed to break their streak, and now they're unbeaten so far in the 2016 season for the Patriots. And as for the Defenders, they're on an 0-12 winless streak for their entire franchise history. So one of these teams is going to break their streak here, and one of them is going to get a win on the season. I know I've said it 3 times. This will be my 3rd time saying it in a row. It's a toss-up game because both of these teams, I think more so the Heat may have more of the advantage in here because we've seen them fight back, and we've seen them have more drive and more strength to want to finish out games and such. But as for Madisonville, we've seen that with them as well. When they played their first home game ever against the Hendersonville Crusaders, they fought back. And when they traveled down to, it's just like when the Heat went to the Knights, the Heat hosted the Knights, they fought back. Even though the Knights started putting points on the board and getting the mercy running, they fought back. So both of these teams are very aggressive. They both like fighting back, but it's really hard to say whichever of these teams is going to get a victory here. But Trent, we've seen both the Heat and we've seen the Defenders and such, and some of the players are decent. And we saw the one Defender player ejected, who by this point I believe he is playing now. But I mean, this is another one of those toss-up games.
Well, you know how much I like my D-line. And because of that, I'm going to take Heat this week because they show me that they have a pretty good D-line against Bowling Green. They like to get pressure on the quarterback. Madisonville, I was thinking about taking them because I feel like they want to show people that, they want to show up. But so does Heat. They're both winless so far, and I'm just going to take Heat because another thing, this is their homecoming game. And those type of games, your guys going to try a little bit harder. So I'm gonna take Heat this week. What about you, James? Who are you going to take?
Look to see who I've got predicted because it's kind of hard to tell. I have preseason picked. I have the Heat picked to win this game. I didn't know. I have Madisonville picked for 2 wins, South Haven and Bowling Green later on in the year at their home field. I didn't know what they had coming into the year. I do have the Heat picked for this game as well. And thinking about it more, seeing last night, I agree with you. They have a lot of fight. They have a lot of fire. They're going to come out in homecoming game, and they're going to want to show up. And Madisonville, I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it'll be another good ball game. I think Madisonville, they're struggling with their numbers. They're struggling. Coach only had 11 guys show up for the game the other night to travel with them. I mean, they're depending on who shows up to travel and who shows up for the games and practices. And the coaches are fighting an uphill battle with that. But if they can get some dedicated guys who want to play football, they want to work on their craft, and they want to participate, they can go down there. And if they're determined enough, they can go down there and they can come away with the win. There's no question about that. But I do have the Heat pick preseason, and it would be really great to see those guys get their first win of the year and to get that ball rolling when it comes to that.
Exactly correct, James. And so from what I'm hearing, we agree on 4 games. And the only game I disagree with you on, I'm taking Bowling Green over CCS, and you're taking CCS over Bowling Green. So we're pretty much neck and neck in this week.
Yeah, so we'll see how their predictions fare out going in this week. Just a reminder, our broadcast for Friday night, St. Andrew Sewanee hosting Franklin Christian Academy at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be broadcasting that game at 7 p.m., maybe 7:15 if Scott Dorset can do a favor for us. The Webb School hosting the Franklin Classical School. So we'll be doing a doubleheader on Friday night, and then Saturday we will be up in Mount Juliet, the Heat hosting the Madisonville Defenders. So that's the schedule for this week in terms of broadcast. The rest of it's on our helmet schedule and such. As always, MDI Construction Inc., building extreme radio. Go to MDIConst.com for all of your construction needs, for commercial construction needs, as well as search them up on Facebook to look at their latest projects. For James Shannon and Trent Legate, I'm Spencer Thompson. We'll see you Friday night on our YouTube channel. See you guys next week.